Hi, everybody. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm so excited to bring to you today a roundtable discussion with some of the world's most leading experts in cult abuse and spiritual abuse. I am so excited to introduce to you the International Cultic Studies Association and some of their members. So thank you guys for joining me. First of all, we have Dr. Michael Langone. He is the former executive director of the ICSA. And he was there at the beginning. We have Dr. Ken Garrett. We have Dr. Patrick Knapp and his wife, Heidi Knapp. Thank you so much for joining me today, you guys, and for bringing with you your wealth of knowledge of spiritual abuse and recovery.
You're
welcome.
Thank you for having
Thanks
us.
for having us.
Thank you.
Well, wonderful. So to get started, I know that this is such a huge topic, specifically for my audience who deals with narcissistic abuse recovery and definitely spiritual abuse being one of those aspects at usually in nearly every single case that I've seen. So, Michael, can you kind of tell me a little bit just about how the ICSA was formed and what your ultimate mission is with the ICSA?
Well, we started back in late 1979, and it was a psychiatrist, a congregational minister. I was a graduate student then, and a businessman and some other people whose children had been involved in cults. And most of the activity in the early years was helping parents who were concerned about kids who had been involved in groups like the Moonies, Scientology, Hare Krishna. The Way International was very big in those days. The children were mostly young college-age kids. Over time, as the organization endured, more and more former members of cultic groups came out and sought help with recovery issues. And by the early 90s, we really made a push to develop our thoughts on that. I published a book called Recovery from Cults. We began running annual conferences and workshops for former members. And as we evolved, it became clear that within that broad population of people who identified themselves as cult victims were many who came out of Christian groups. Probably Christian, pseudo-Christian groups were the majority. Also Eastern Guru, New Age, some political and occasionally commercial cults, but much of it was from what at least claimed to be Christianity. And some people felt a need to deal with religious issues, particularly those who came out of an abusive Christian situation but wanted to hold on to their Christian faith. So we had programs at workshops, and then in 2017 or 2018, I forget which year, we organized a special conference in Hartford, Connecticut on spiritual abuse recovery. I think Ken spoke. Most of the authors of our book, Wounded Faith, were there, and the book grew out of that conference. And we published the book in January, and it has various chapters on aspects of recovery, such as forgiveness, what makes a safe church, how can you heal, your relationship with God. So, and I think it's a useful book for people in particular who were trying to maintain their Christian faith, but it's not just for them, because some of this stuff is just sort of standard fare, like my chapter deals with trust issues and so on, and that applies to even people who haven't come out of Christian groups.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I do want to definitely bring up Wounded Faith, which is such an excellent book and such a great resource, as you mentioned, for people, anybody really who's recovering from spiritual abuse. There is a chapter, Ken, I think you might have written it about ways to identify a safe church, which I also felt like was a super helpful, very practical way to move forward past, not leaving behind the lessons that you've just learned from leaving the cult, but moving forward and applying those to finding a healthy community and a safe place to really practice and express your faith and your beliefs. So yeah, actually, let's just get into that. Michael, one of the things that you wrote about in the beginning is the three aspects that abused people must deal with, and you kind of just talked about how to determine somebody who's trustworthy and somebody who isn't trustworthy, and obviously these are good practical life skills to have, regardless of if you're in a cult or coming out of one or not. Learning how to safely open up to other people, which can feel especially terrifying to people who've had that trust horribly violated. And then how to assert limits, how to actually enforce the boundaries, not just establish them. So I felt like those were extremely helpful, just for an example for the audience here on ways to practically implement life skills moving forward, and taking your experience and moving forward with that. Do you want to kind of expound on anything with those three aspects, Michael?
Yeah, well, the three general challenges of determining who is trustworthy and who is not. Learning how to safely open up to those who are trustworthy, and learning how to assertively set limits on others, particularly those who may not be trustworthy. Now, these challenges are challenges for everybody growing up or trying to adapt to a social world, but they're especially challenging to people who have come out of an abusive occultic situation, because the manipulator behind the abuse will distort normal trust. So if you show some hesitation, you may be accused of being paranoid, or why don't you trust me? I'm a man of God, or you have people around him saying, oh, he's a man of God. So that they're actually getting you to short circuit your normal ways of defending yourself. Whereas normal people don't expect to become best friends in 5 minutes. They realize that you don't know me, so you don't know if you can trust me, you don't know if I'm competent, you don't know if I have hidden agendas. So you're going to keep a certain space. And I will, if I'm a respectful person and genuinely trustworthy, I'll respect that distance and I'll respect your boundaries. But manipulators tend not to, and your specialty is with narcissists, and narcissists have to feed themselves, so someone else's boundaries become an obstacle, not something to respect. And in the chapter, I try to enunciate some principles to keep in mind, like don't expect everybody to be trustworthy in all dimensions, I think, which is an important one.
Yes, so good.
Yeah, some people may be trustworthy in a competence sense, someone who can help you deal with practical problems. Another one might be trustworthy just to vent to, but really is a nincompoop when it comes to practical stuff. So, but someone coming out of a closed-minded, abusive, highly ideological environment has difficulty making those kinds of nuanced judgments. So that's why trust is really a central challenge for everybody coming out of an abusive situation.
Yeah, I actually particularly enjoyed that. Boundaries is such a huge thing that I teach both on my channel and in my one-on-one coaching, because first of all, this is you must have this in order to have a fulfilling life, regardless of what your past experiences have been. If you want something fulfilling, you must know how to set healthy boundaries and understand where people go in relation to your life. We understand this in terms of jobs, right? We don't keep allowing someone who's destroying our business, so to, in this instance, to be in that position anymore. We remove them because they can't fulfill the role. And yet we have harder time doing that when it comes to relationships and interpersonal connections. So I liked that the short fences that you were listing, like short and thin fences, so that you know where people go. Easy way for me to describe it to my audience is that, if I'm at the gym, these people are very trustworthy in technique and movement, and I'm going to listen to them, as opposed to perhaps even my pastor, who I will listen to over, in very important things in my life. And I have a great relationship with my spiritual leadership, but, they will have a more influential role in other areas versus some people who maybe I just see for a couple of hours every day, but they're going to be the most knowledgeable ones in that situation. So I love the way that you were able to kind of pick apart the way, that is okay. And that healthy people understand that. Healthy people are okay with other people having boundaries. And in fact, I would say healthy people look for that. Right. Because if you can protect the things that are yours, then I know I can trust you with the things that are mine. So I love that was brought up right away, first thing in the book. Just so good. So what another interesting thing that I want to kind of inform my audience of here is that many of the authors of this book and the leadership of ICSA have personal experience being in cults. So firsthand, you are all highly educated, highly, you're very well developed personally, and yet we can still have experiences. I think that just goes to show that nobody is off limits. You're a certain degree, a certain type of title or position that you hold in a job or whatever doesn't necessarily keep you from being exempt. And of course, that's my story as well. I started doing this type of coaching because of my own experience with a narcissist and finding out how damaging and destructive that type of relationship can be. So Ken, you personally have experience dealing with a cult. You were in a cult, and the first chapter that you write in this book is essentially about the stigma almost that you felt was being carried with you when coming out of a cult and trying to go back into church and trying to find a healthy place to make your home in. And I'm wondering if you can kind of talk to that, because I feel like that is definitely something that people would struggle with a lot in this situation of kind of being looked at as damaged goods or a project or, something else, as opposed to being seen for their true self.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Angel. Cults are not places that are full of properly, healthily differentiated people. Okay. Your desires and your inner life and your goals and everything become so mishmashed. It's like if you had a bowl of peas and then you mashed them all together. So where you stop and where to define yourself is not something that happens in a cult very much at all. So entering a new church, because my faith led me to want to go and worship at a church, and my children, it was a concern for me that they be in a church so that they could be in a youth group and go bowling and eat pizza, and I that's what I felt. So we ended up going back into a church, and I experienced horrible lack of confidence and anxiety, and I would walk out of services and be alternate between being fiercely self-righteous and judgmental of the church, not very deep preaching, superficial programs, just all of the elitism and nastiness that's facilitated in a cult. And then that would alternate with utter shame and an awareness of not only my behaviors and habits within the cult, which were some criminal, and just some unhealthy. And I mean, it was just a horrible place. And I was a part of it in that regard. So I would have these two, I'd have the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other. And it was a terrible experience entering the church. Now, here's the reason why. I had no ability to define myself apart from what I was receiving from the environment around me. So, and that in the cult is so regulated that it's very easy. You receive treats and affirmation and good things if you are a good, obedient cult member, and you receive censure, punishment, horrible emotional abuse if you're being bad or not complying. So that wasn't really working in the churches that I went to, because by and large they were healthy, goofed up churches, like every church is. Every healthy church is kind of goofy. You know, we need our Lord to be with us, and he's not. And so we go a little crazy, and that's okay. That was not something I could live with in entering and trying out other churches. That ambiguity and that lack of ability to define myself as doing well or not doing well. So going into the church after my cultic experience was just a horrible experience. I didn't know how to get on track to where my feelings could become consistent again with my faith. In the cult, my feelings were in a way consistent with my faith. As long as I was doing the right thing, you know, no grace in the cult. As long as I was doing the right thing, I would get the emotional hits and I would associate them with my faith. That didn't happen in the churches that I went to, because they were cults. So I was like a guy in a Wendell Berry short story that I love called Walk With Me. And he describes this man with a schizophrenic disorder. He describes the experience of being a lost sheep and hearing the voice of the shepherd, but having no ability or knowledge of how to get to that voice. And that was my experience, and I think a lot of experiences of lost sheep trying to get back into the fold. We know there's a shepherd, we hear his voice, we've heard it before, but we've lost the ability to, we've lost our voice to yell out for help. We've lost the trail that got us where we were. We just don't know how to get to that voice. And so that was my experience in trying to fit in with a normal church.
And interestingly enough, you're a pastor as well.
Yes. Yeah.
No. And so I imagine your church is you're highly sensitive, I'm imagining, to these types of concerns of people who might be visiting you or visiting your church.
I hope so. I became a pastor because in my church we were so bullied into being Bible students. Every member of the cult knew Greek, Hebrew, and some knew Aramaic. I mean, we were just really freaks about that.
Interesting.
And
Wow.
yeah, we were kind of like a crime family that would study the Bible.
So, that's a good
one.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where we were. And so I went into the ministry because it was just the path of least resistance and the place where I found the most emotional stability in doing advanced Bible studies. And I don't think I treasured or valued being a pastor for, I don't know, years after getting out of seminary. Before that, it was just preaching and teaching. And it took a long time before the Lord really enchanted me with the beauty of loving people as a shepherd and using my education to better love people instead of using people to advance my what I'd learned, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely.
So I ended up a pastor. My church had been through a horrible split, and a gentleman in that church who was in seminary with me and knew me, he said, you know, Ken, I think I have just the church for you. It was a church that was very broken and downtown Portland. So to this day, our church is wildly diverse. We're full of all kinds of people coming in and out the doors every Sunday. So we've had to learn how to be a place that does not impose some of the normal customary expectations on people that come through the door. In many churches, it's expected you would shake someone's hand and share your name. Of course. I mean, right?
Mhm.
We've learned, because of the community we're in and the brokenness and the diversity, that we really respect people's need for privacy, and also to not be cornered or engaged in a conversation that involves how committed are you going to be here and what are your plans here, as much as a hey, thank you for worshiping here today, it's great to have you here, and then letting it go. So yeah, I think my experience in a cult has made me maybe a little gun shy from recruiting and going after people like that.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
My
Yeah,
church
that-
doesn't have membership, by the way, which
Mm.
would probably get me kicked out of what, if I was in a denomination, it'd probably get me kicked right out. But we've reached a place where we do not have formal membership requirements for our people. We trust if a person believes in Jesus and they desire to be a part of our community, we treat them as members and invite them into our community as they are. Yeah.
You know, I like that, because you started out talking about how, you know, there's this lost sheep looking for its place to go. And
Yeah.
truly, I believe, you know, Jesus put other people. And in fact, somebody had even wrote this in the book that said, actually, I think it might have been you, Pat and Heidi. You said healthy people are our primary source of recovery, and God provides us the relationships that we need most at the time we need them most.
Yeah.
And I love that, because that's exactly right. God already knows, you know, and he put other people there who have essentially prepared a place for that one sheep, that's looking for its way home. And I love that. So, and actually on that note, if we can just move on to Pat and Heidi and your chapter. You guys had an interesting situation, because you needed to essentially repair your marriage. Is this correct? After your
Well,
Not quite.
experience?
not quite.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead and start.
Okay.
Hal.
We, long story short, we both had a lot of experience in, as with Ken, a religiously abusive environment that identified as a Christian church. But we were in different groups,
Okay.
and we didn't really meet until about 12 years ago. And we're married a little over 9 years ago.
So you each had your own separate situations involving cults first.
Yes.
Yes.
Fascinating.
Yes.
Yeah. So, long story short is we certainly have needed to build our own marriage with baggage that we've had from the past.
Mm.
We were both previously married and then divorced. So we've certainly had the experience of working with what is it like to do repair that builds a marriage.
Yes. Absolutely.
And I liked your chapter because you talked a lot about the things that have to be present for a healthy marriage, which again, I just find that that's such a life skill. You know, it really doesn't matter what, you know, where you're coming from. You need to know what makes up a healthy marriage so that you know where to put effort and energy, you know, into.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you had mentioned in one of the chapters that you guys wrote was that your spouse can either be your greatest source or your greatest hindrance. to encouragement, right? So it can either, the spouse really determines the direction that you go as an individual, right? And the speed of which you go that way.
Yes, that's so true. I think one of the things, as Pat and I were talking about, sharing today, and in light of our chapter, that we think is foundational is the, the ARE principle. It's so core because it can apply really to any relationship, but so much to the marital bond. And especially if you're trying to, if you've come out of narcissistic abuse, as you were expressing that you focus a lot on that topic, just the questions of, can I reach you? Are you available? And can I rely on you to respond to me supportively and emotionally and consistently, right? And do I know you will value me and stay close? And we were talking about how important that is and what a core foundation that is to be able to be that for each other. And obviously, if you're a narcissist or you're dealing with a narcissist, the answer would be no to those basic questions. You wouldn't be able to really be emotionally available, supportive, healing, and engaging. I think one of the things we know is a challenge for married couples when they come out of a broken, system, abusive religious system, is that there is a lot of conflict already there. There's a lot of things that, that make it hard to come together. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, there's plenty of raw material to work with. And there's not uncommonly virtually a whole new language to be learned.
Yeah.
The ARE conversation that Heidi was just referring to comes from a lady that is a EFT counselor, Dr. Sue Johnson. And she talks about the importance of availability, responsiveness, and engagement, hence the ARE. And it is something absolutely that comes in, not uncommonly, in short and thin layers, as was mentioned, that concept of being short and thin is important. And certainly in building a good marriage, as in building any kind of relationship, but all the more so with a marriage, it's commonly, it's kind of coming out of a religiously abusive environment. It seems counterintuitive because you want something more instant, you want something quicker, you want to be healed now.
Yep.
And the reality is, no, it's going to be short and thin, and it's going to take some time. And any sort of healthy relationship involves those things. So yeah, it certainly is a joy to experience, though.
Yeah,
And,
the reward is worth it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So beautiful. One of the things that I also liked about the first chapter that we're talking about right now that you guys wrote was the beliefs that are held, the false beliefs that are held that empower spiritual abuse specifically, but any type of abuse really, to take place, to even occur in the first place. And so many, again, even I dare say all of the clients that I've ever worked with had so many of these things there. And it's like, if we would have just known about one of these things, like, hey, this belief is evidence of something else happening here that is empowering abuse, that is enabling this to continue, we would have I'd have less clients, I'd have less subscribers. But one of them being the field of psychology is evil. And man, I can't tell you, so many narcissists, right? it's easy to identify a narcissist based off of, for me, how they respond to the concept of going to therapy or getting outside help. Either they're absolutely not going to do it, or we're going to go to all of them. I'm not a narcissist. I'm going to go to 10. I will go to 20 therapists. And I've seen that happen many times where they hire all of them then. So the inability to kind of say, okay, this is an issue and somebody could potentially know more than me about something and could help me, right? That's narcissists won't do it. Will never do that. So I don't know if you want to kind of comment on that, and also the other false beliefs that really do empower abuse to continue.
Well, to begin with, on the subject of narcissism, there's no question in the area of counseling, the two types of clients that historically seem to be the most difficult to work with, one is a narcissist, the other is a borderline.
Both cluster B personality disorders, as it were.
Correct. Yep. And with the narcissist, when they go to counseling or coaching, they aren't going there to give help. They're going there to give advice and to control the environment to their benefit.
Yes,
exactly.
So
true.
They are absolutely the hardest ones to work with. But yeah, I mean, in terms of the false beliefs, certainly that's one. Another one, which is really huge with an awful lot of folks that we have spoken with over the years, is that husbands must lead, wives must submit and follow. And an awful lot of the people we work with have sadly believed that, and they've believed that's what the Bible teaches. Which our take is, no, that's not true. The Bible does not teach that. Probably one of the best books that addresses that topic is one written by Rebecca Groothuis called Women Caught in the Conflict. And it was written back in 90, about 98, I think. But really does take apart that notion. She's deceased now, but certainly a Christian and a very thoughtful person, and really well informed. But that would be a book that would be one that we might suggest, although it's a little on the academic side. There's other ones as well, but that would be one false belief. Another one is acknowledging the significance and value of emotion, because in unhealthy religious systems, what you're trained to do is to shut down your emotions, and to not trust your emotions.
Yes, that's so good.
So, in a good book to counter that is a book called Faithful Feelings by Matthew Elliott. He takes that notion apart from a biblical standpoint and makes a case that no, emotions should help us help inform us what is true and false. They should not be parked and left out in the woods somewhere. Or denied.
Exactly. And in so many aberrant groups or even one-on-one relationships that are abusive, being able to get in touch with your emotions and learn from your emotions is definitely parked, put on the shelf. Certainly in the groups that we work with people, when we coach people, do support groups, people have come out of these aberrant forms of Christianity, and they've really learned not to listen to their emotions. And so one of the topics that we like to walk people through is the importance of tuning in to yourself, part of that mindfulness, learning to listen, learning to identify what your emotions are teaching you and telling you. And it's a really important skill for people to walk with and move forward.
Angel, there's something I was thinking that I think this relates to what we're talking about, and it has to do, Michael, with your background too. I joined the International Cultic Studies Association when I started studying for a doctorate because my research subject was going to be spiritual abuse in evangelical churches.
Wow.
And I quickly found that other than a couple of wonderful books that had been printed about it, other than a couple of those, the problem was framed as a spiritual problem that I could solve with more Bible study, more praying,
Yeah.
better preaching, and a better pastor. And there was no reference in these books. I didn't even know the sources, but I noted there was no reference to academic study that had been done about cults. There was only talk about proper doctrine, improper doctrine, womanizing pastors, fundamentalist, weird, repressed churches and pastors or whatever. And so I reached out a little bit and I went to an ICSA conference. I stayed in the corner and just kind of tried to see what was going on. I didn't even think there would be Christians there. I didn't expect that, but I needed to, if I was going to get a doctorate, I needed to go outside the confines of the seminary and learn from practitioners like Pat and Heidi and Lorna and Bill Goldberg and these Bob and Judy Pardon and Daniel Shaw, these incredible practitioners and academics and researchers like Michael and the various writers. I needed to learn from people regardless of their religious background, because I knew something pathological and almost medical had happened to me, and the church was providing me no resources except prayer books and study guides that were
Powerful.
using
Wow.
the same tools. It's like you can use a
Yeah.
hammer to build a fence or to take a fence down. So the same tools that had ruined me, all the Bible study and the submission to authority and the right doctrine and the evangelizing, those were the tools that were suggested would fix me. And I tried it and it didn't work. And so I believe God led me to the International Cultic Studies Association so that I could be with people of all faiths or no faiths and simply learn the facts of this issue of sociological abuse. And so the idea of frowning on psychology, I don't know if they know it or not, but narcissistic leaders, they need to keep their people away from the likes of Lifton and Langone and Shaw and these writers and Alexandra Stein. They need to keep them away from that, because things get so much clearer when you don't have angels and fluffy wings fluttering around what you're reading. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So that's kind of what I got from getting into ICSA and rubbing shoulders with that kind of truth.
Yeah,
Can I make a
there's
couple
an
of comments on
please.
that?
Please,
Yeah.
yes.
First, I think in 2013, we did a research study with about 200 former members of a wide variety of cultic groups.
Wow.
So you figure maybe a third to a half of them were not Christian groups. And 42% said they had gone to churches for help. Of those who went to churches for help, 40% gave the churches the absolute lowest rating on a scale of 1 to 5. They were not at all helpful.
Yeah.
And
Oh.
that was part of what led to our kind of development of this whole project that's culminated now in the Wounded Faith book. The second comment is, I wrote a short article for Psychiatric Journal years ago where I talked about 3 models of cult conversion: the deliberative model, the psychodynamic model, and the thought reform model. To simplify it, the deliberative model, which sociologists like, religious people, clergy, people join groups because of what they think about the groups. And the emphasis is always on belief and having the right beliefs, and you do things because of beliefs. The psychodynamic model puts the emphasis on people joining because of unconscious needs that the group fulfills. So someone who is lonely may have companionship needs, social needs. Someone who is vocationally stunted may be given a job in the group and feel some kind of special status now. So this, and then the thought reform model says people join because of what the group does to them. Okay, this is the manipulation, the exploitation. In a way, it's sort of like a unidimensional ARE thing, where availability, yeah, but the members be available for the leadership. Responsiveness, the members be responsive to the leadership. Engagement, the members engage according to the leadership. Everything is pointing up. And you know, that creates a distortion in the psyche. And if people are in such a group long enough, their identity changes.
Yeah.
You know, at a deep level, they're still there. Their old self is still there, lurking about, but they develop this kind of pseudo identity. And then when they come out, and as Ken, as you described, you go to churches and you're given more theology. Oh, well, you got to get right with God, and your prayer life isn't right. And they're missing the whole psychological dimension that you really have to explore in order to heal. And, you know, this is what I think is one of the unique things about our organization, that we bring people together from disparate backgrounds and, you know, causes some conflict, but ultimately it's the only route to get kind of a thoroughness to the healing.
Yeah, there's an old saying, I remember seeing it like in the on posters, like in my school when I was a child, that said knowledge is power, right? And so who's ever got the knowledge has the power. And I feel like that's one of the reasons why so many people would rather just, you believe what I tell you, right? Like, I'm the husband, I lead, and you shut up and follow. I'm the pastor, I lead, and you shut up and follow, right? And so because if you know that we're all equal, then that presents a big problem for the person who needs a supply, who, you know, whether that's simply for an ego boost, or if it's financial or other, you know, reasons. So I think that's so important. We should be complete beings, body, soul, and spirit. You know, we should be whole and not neglect one of these things. You know, that neglecting your mind is neglecting an area that God gave you to govern, to steward, and to use ultimately. And so when I was reading through the ICSA website, that was one of the things that I loved. Was it was clear that it was very comprehensive. One of the things that I find too, I'd love to hear any of y'all's feedback on this, is that when I start working with clients, people typically are not aware that there's a real biochemical connection happening, rearranging of your body, of the way that you think, in terms of your chemical development, because you have developed a trauma bond, and it is an addictive substance. And you would never tell an addict, stop doing that, just stop it, and here's some theology for your heroin problem. And yet we do say that to people. We do say that to people who are in narcissistic relationships. Stop it, just stop calling them, stop going to them, stop, you know. And we're not taking, because we don't understand that there's a real physical issue. There's a chemical release, that a compound that is happening in your bloodstream, tailor-made for each person, more addictive than any other outside substance. The one that your body makes, the most addictive type of substance that there is on the planet. So I think that the lack of knowledge and understanding what makes somebody so connected to a group that is a cult, somebody who is abusive in any type of way, there must be more education on that, so that you understand that your approach of like, I'm going to reason with this person, that's not effective for the addiction part of it.
Some people have speculated about addictions and cult joining, and there's something to it. The late Paul Martin, who ran a residential facility for former cult members for 20 years, used to talk about the buzz, you know, and the high that people would get, especially in Pentecostal churches where everybody is excited and singing and dancing and shouting, and they're just feeling the Holy Spirit. that high has an impact on you. And for some people, when they leave the group, they miss that high,
Yes.
and it can make them vulnerable to other abusive groups. You know, that's why sometimes when I talk with an ex-member that's looking for a church, I'll say, look for a boring church, you know, where they're not going to try to get you into an excited emotional state, where they're going to give you some space and let you be yourself and give you some time.
Yeah.
You know, and that's not to say that, say, the Pentecostal is necessarily abusive, but it's that emotion puts it at higher risk. And I think pastors, particularly in that tradition, have to be extra careful about how they're relating to people in their congregation, because that emotional high that gets induced can be easily misused and can become like an addiction.
Yeah, Michael, and I would just want to add to that too. I know we've heard from different people we've worked with, you know, there's also the high people get from, as you were talking earlier, about the instant friendships.
Yeah.
You know, people are so hungry for connection today and to have relationships. And so when they get involved in these churches or these groups, and they all of a sudden have instant friends, it's not healthy, but when they leave these groups, they feel this huge social hole, and they want to look for it somewhere else, because they felt like they had this, you know, this family, this closeness. And a lot of times it isn't really what it seemed. You know, it's like you leave and all of a sudden they're not there for you anymore. You're kind of cut off, the black sheep. But the fact that there's also that connection and community, that you feel that pseudo closeness, and it's people long for that. And so a lot of times, sometimes that even brings them back, because they're not finding it. It's not really a normal way of connecting with people. And it's a lot harder when you're out in the normal world trying to build relationship. And a lot of people just get lonely and they miss the relationships. And so they go back, or they try to stay connected to the people that, you know, were in the group. And so.
And that's accentuated by the grandiosity of the mission.
Yeah.
The group is always saving the world, whatever it might be. The late Margaret Singer used to say that one of the challenges of recovery for an ex-cult member is to learn how to be merely human again. You know, because in the cult, you've got this grandiose mission and you're just special. You know, and now you're just another human being like everybody else. And it's a difficult transition to make. And we haven't talked about the people born or raised in cults, but they have a whole set of challenges that are unique. Where they, you know, what we would consider a pathological environment is normal for them. It's what they grew up in. And when they leave a cult, they're leaving friends and family behind, not returning to friends and family that they left if they joined as an adult. Plus what you mentioned, Angel, about the biological changes and the impact of trauma, that's especially acute for people who were born or raised in a group. So very, very challenging problems for them.
You know, one of the things that I have noticed is that people who were raised by narcissists have tend to be narcissists. They have a high, you know, whether that's a learned behavior because they grew up in that environment, or there is some sort of genetic predisposition to that. But I have noticed that with my clients, they'll say, you know, I'm leaving, but the mom or the dad of their spouse or of their whoever that they're trying to get away from is also a narcissist. Have you noticed things like this where the children born to people who are already part of a cult, tend to display the qualities that the cult leader had valued. Is that common?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. It's the parents see the children see their parents ceding over parental positions to the cult leader. It's like
Yeah.
it's like I had a friend who was developing a intentional community, Christian community in town. Wonderful man, and he envisioned people living in harmony and all that. And he was asking me what I thought about it, and I threw up. And then no, but
Right.
we had a good conversation about it. And I said, at the end of the day, here's the deal: who determines where the thermostat is set? Who
Sure.
decides what cable channels the house is going to have, and how the cars are used, and how the diet works, and how much is spent on groceries, and what kind of milk you drink? I mean, who's going to be the parent of this household? And of course, it would be him, the leader. And children, when they grow up in an environment seeing somebody else doing mom and dad jobs, and mom and dad being like his children too, it
wow.
really messes with their whole concept of themselves and whatnot. So here's the deal: when mom or dad begins to define themselves for themselves, even in opposition to the group and the marriage and everything. In other words, when mom says, I no longer believe this and this and this about Pastor Joe, and I'm not comfortable with this and this about Pastor Joe, and I'm not going to transmit this behavior with my children because I don't think it's right. And husband, I no longer am willing to live with this dynamic of relationship we have, whether it's our money, our sex, where we live, and all of that. That causes sparks and causes a lot of trouble, and that usually ends in my experience, in separation or divorce if it's continually carried out, unless the spouse concedes the individuality and the rights of the person. But the problem is the spouse has become narcissistic in himself or herself, usually himself, and is unable to make that decision. And so, yes, the qualities of the narcissistic leader becomes almost like a cell reproduction, reproduced in the household, and really wreaks havoc on marriages and children. And that's in my experience very, very common.
And Ken, when you were talking earlier about how, you left the cult and then you were trying all of these churches, and your response to these churches ranged from, very self-righteous, why wasn't you preaching more deep, into the word and all this type of stuff. That's another common thing that I have with my clients, is them asking, am I the narcissist? Because I do these tendencies, which again can be learned and things like that. Did you ever have, or is that common for people who are coming out of spiritual abuse, where they're wondering, how do I know that I'm right for leaving this situation? How do I know that I'm not actually the one who has the false ideas, right?
Yes.
The false beliefs, the false, how do I know that I'm doing the right thing?
Yeah. I know my colleagues here are going to have things to say too about this, so I'm going to be
Wonderful.
quick
Yes.
with what I want to say. When you leave a cult, I'm going to just speak kind of conceptually here. Let's just say you stay in that cult because you believe in 50 things that are true, that you're taught in the cult. Okay, you might leave that cult because you've lost 5 of those beliefs, usually about the leader. And it might be a doctrinal thing, but you've lost the belief that it's good for your family. You've lost the belief it's good for your marriage. Like me, you've lost the belief that it'll morally help you and all that. So now you've got 45 beliefs that you still hold. When you leave the cult, you leave with those 45 beliefs.
Absolutely.
And they might be things like, no, only one translation of the Bible is the true one, of course. Well, of course you have to go to church on Wednesday night, Monday morning, Sunday. I mean, what? No Sunday evening service? What kind of church is this? Good grief, I saw, women's knees today in church. What are they doing? Not
Oh
wearing
no.
and blah, blah, blah. I made that one up.
Okay.
But you see what I'm saying? That you walk into that new church with 45 of those beliefs, and along the way, hopefully, a lot more of them are going to start getting knocked down, and you might end up with 15 beliefs, but they are Christian, Orthodox, healthy, great beliefs about faith, Jesus, the Bible, and hopefully you add some good beliefs in there too. But that process of weeding through the cult that you bring with you out is the mistake, and that's what it is. So I'm done with that. Pat, Mike, Heidi, what do you think of that?
What's the question again?
Yeah, sorry.
Angel,
I was asking, do you see that people who are leaving a cult tend to question, am I doing the right thing? How do I know that I'm not the one in the wrong? Because for my clients, they say, well, I also will lash out at people like the narcissist does to me. How do I know I'm not the narcissist, right? And they're acting from a place of trauma, not from a place of control, but the behavior is very similar. Like Ken was saying, he walked into the church and was judging, right? Like, hey, bad preaching, not enough of this, too little of that, whatever. So I was just curious, people who, and the reason I'm ultimately asking the question is, someone's watching this program and they're questioning, how do I know that I think that, I believe that, how do I know that I'm not the one who's trying to spiritually abuse somebody else or trying to justify my desire to break away from this person through spiritual reasoning or whatever?
Well, one of the things that comes to my mind is, we've done a good bit of research and reading on trauma and the effects of trauma and a narcissistic relationship. And these environments certainly produce traumatic experiences relationally. And one of the common traits of a narcissistic system or leader is to project on people, to project, this is who you are, not who you think you are. This is who we say you are. This is what we say you're thinking and what you're feeling. And what that creates is so much confusion within a person that they can't separate the forest from the trees right away. It takes a while to realize who they really are versus who they've been told they are. And so when you leave a group like this or a narcissistic system like this, there's a lot of unpacking that needs to go on of being able to start to silence the narcissist voice and start to get in touch with who you really are. What is your true voice within? And a lot of times, I know with Pat and I, we will work with people as you do, Angel, coaching and doing the coaching relationship and support groups and education. But sometimes we just need to refer them to a professional counselor that can go deep and can help them with those traumatic experiences. We can take them so far, but when we feel that somebody needs something that goes deeper, and it's kind of more like an MD versus a surgeon, we can work with people in a lot of ways, a lot of capacities, but when there's those deeper traumas and those psychological traumas, if you've been told who you are and it's not really who you are, we sometimes will really refer people to counseling for that, to start unpacking that. But to at least know that that's a normal experience if you've been in a deeply intrinsic narcissistic system or relationship that you could have very well been projected upon. It's just an important piece to start to unpack, and it can definitely take time.
I would add that the feeling that one doesn't trust one's own perceptions or blames oneself is actually a logical consequence of the structure of a cultic abusive situation.
Definitely.
I'll refer to a finding of a research study that I did years ago that led to the development of a psychological abuse scale. We had people rate their groups on about 120 different items, 1 to 5. The 2 highest ranking items was number 1, the group considers itself to be an elite, grandiosity, and number 2, dissent is not tolerated. So what that says is if you want to feel special, get the carrot of the group, the eliteness, shut up and obey, and don't disagree. Okay, and it creates a dynamic within the group where anyone dissenting is always wrong by definition, or by bullying or pressuring or whatever, and the leadership is always right. So people learn to question their own perceptions, their beliefs, and to take it upon themselves. If anything goes wrong in the group, say for instance, it's a church that's trying to raise money for a project and not enough money is raised, well, it's because you were not right with God. You didn't pray enough. You were not pure enough. It's always your fault. You're wrong. The leader is always superior and grandiose and the peak of the elitism. And people who adapt to that system, in a sense, can be sort of like sub-narcissists, to use the narcissism framework, where you pay homage to the big honcho, you know, and you feed him, but one of your payoffs is you got other people under you who will feed you. Okay, and when you come out, as Ken explained, you may have come out because you rejected certain aspects of the system, but you've still got other aspects inculcated inside you, and it takes a whole process of recovery before you're able to sort of spit those out and only leave in what's worth keeping.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes too, I know just from people agreeing with you, Michael, and people we've worked with that have been additionally damaged by what we might call as hot seats, or they sort of, a person gets targeted because maybe they're more of a threat to the leader in some way. And we have worked with different women that were targeted because they spoke up and, you know, they shared their opinions, their thoughts, their feelings about things maybe they didn't like, or things that were concerning for their family, and really got labeled very harshly with different labels that did some emotional damage
And they become
in their life. And I know that can also happen. I'm sorry, say that again.
They become examples to the larger group.
Well, that absolutely.
That's people who might be sharing their thoughts. I mean, that's a group, almost a necessary control dynamic.
Yeah.
You have to squash the dissenter and make a show of him or her, so that the other people who might be harboring such thoughts will suppress them and will get in line.
Yes, that's very true. And I think that's what they would, people that we've known that have been on these hot seats that were actually just horribly berated for just who they were as people. But again, they were dissenters of some sort. And yes, that's very accurate.
Well, in the nature of, as Heidi shared, the hot seat, or the pressure, the extreme pressure by leadership upon an individual can really kind of inoculate them when they get out to even be willing to go to a counselor or to be able to go to a coach, because they feel like, I've already experienced that. Thank you anyway. I don't need that. I don't want that. That hurts. I know, as I think back on the group that I was in, and I was in for 14 years, a very unhealthy pseudo-Christian group. It was real hard initially to even consider counseling or coaching. It was easier to maybe, and I didn't have the word for this at the time, but to find people that could mentor me or to come alongside of me that would help model what healthy looks like and feels like. That was not uncommonly a lot felt a lot safer
Mm,
because of the baggage.
mm,
And I think going back, Michael, to your comment earlier about the second generation members, the people that were born into unhealthy religious systems, there's no question they have some similarities to first generation members, but they have some very unique features also, because they have no before the cult experience. All they have is the family and the cultic type of experience that they've gone through. So in some ways it goes deeper for them, and it takes in some ways perhaps longer for recovery to occur. And certainly those that work with second generation members need to have a deeper level of compassion, I think. They just need that. They just really need that.
I just backtracking just a little bit, because I want to say something about that too, the second generation thing. But if a cult does not have any enemies, the leaders will create enemies. And the more flesh and blood present the enemy is, the better, so that the cult members can be intimidated, as Michael mentioned, but also so that they can be trained in warfare against the other.
Wow.
And so by demonstrating how to treat the hot seat person or the defector, as we call them, or whatever, the leaders demonstrate how to do combat against those who are on the outside, and also what will happen to you, as Michael stated, if you step out on the outside. So I think it's very critical to note for these people leaving these churches, they often do it under the cloud of church discipline. So that carries guilt with it. It carries a biblical feeling to it. And so, but they don't realize they were created as enemies in order to serve the needs of the church, to put its resources and all that.
That's a good
So I think that's a point that can
Yeah.
encourage people and let them know that they were worth being made an enemy because they were doing something real.
Yeah, yeah, that's good.
And then the second generations is such a hot topic with us, and it is with me for what I do here in Portland, because I have trouble figuring it out, first off. And my children, of course, are second generation survivors of a cult. So I have a lot of trouble figuring out how to, as the parent who raised them in the cult, where do I fit into helping at all? But even with the younger people that aren't my children, it's very difficult. I don't completely understand how to help them, and I'm very troubled that there are, by my thinking, very few second generation survivors who have gone through the academic preparation, the training, and the partnership with first generation cultists to enable them to help. I don't see as much of that as I hope to see in the future. I wish there was a fifth box on my computer screen right now with a second generation therapist whose parents raised him or her in this situation and is part of the team. I don't know how to join their team, and I want them on my team. So that's kind of where I'm at with the SGAs.
Yeah, it's interesting. I sort of share your mystification. We make the best guesses we can. And one of the things that I've thought about some is that in an authoritarian environment, you have two ways to adapt. You obey or you lie. If you tell the truth, you're going to be stomped on, unless it's a truth that's an approved truth.
Right.
Yeah.
So someone raised in that environment never really gets to know who they are, because when you're obeying, you're projecting an image. And when you're lying, you're hiding something. And one of the things that Lorna Goldberg, who's done a lot of work with second generation, has made a point of, is that sometimes in the group, they become their own little children's support group. So it's like the little lighters all get together and tell the truth to each other, but they won't tell the truth to the adults, to the parents, or to the leadership. And that
Exactly.
makes the cliquishness that sometimes when they come out, they carry with them. So they're looking for their clique, and they're still sort of in opposition to authority, to adults. Only now they don't have the pressure of the authoritarian environment forcing them to comply. So it gives them freedom to do things that they never would have thought of doing, which might be, telling your parents off, something that might never have been tried in the group. And I don't know, I don't see any shortcut treatment or recovery. Like when I look at those situations, I just see a long process. Like my impression with some of the second generation I've known is that some of them really need a lot of psychotherapy because they got a lot of crap to work through. And they've in a sense they've got to construct an identity that is adaptive to an relatively open, pluralistic society, because their identity was formed in this authoritarian structure that, truth was the last thing that it wanted, just obedience and lying. If you can't obey, you lie and you pretend.
I just want to quickly introduce Dr. Neil Damgard. He just joined us. Neil, thank you so much. You're the editor and the driving force behind Wounded Faith, the book that we've been discussing. And so I just welcome you. Thank you so much for showing up and for joining us with your expertise. I appreciate it so much.
Well, hello, everybody.
Wonderful. Well,
a day late and a dollar short here. And I will tell you that these are good friends that I have the highest regard and respect for. And the book was a privilege to be part of. And it was a joy to, what did we work on it? About 2.5 years, Michael? Something like that?
Probably.
And it was a process that was a lovely challenge. I think an unusual opportunity to bring together a whole bunch of fascinating people to address what is a far more common problem within the philosophical family of people who have faith of some kind. They're and struggling with having been abused spiritually. So let me just say it was a privilege to be part of the process and to be the technical putter together of stuff. There's got to be a better word than that, but you know what I mean. And I enjoyed everybody's contribution to the process.
Well, yes, I read the book, Neil, and actually one of the things that I thought was so helpful, even for people, as I said before, who haven't experienced any type of abuse, but just as a life skill, to be able to identify a safe environment. And your chapter on the features of a spiritually safe church was one of those things that I think is just so important for everybody to know, whether or not you're coming out of a cult or a spiritually abusive situation or not. And I don't know if you would like to just talk about that. If you could just give the audience some of those features that you list in your chapter of this book.
Well, it's a changing animal. I think I've since I wrote the article, the chapter on that, and continue to think about this. A church or a community that at one time is safe can become unsafe. And I don't know, Michael, have we said this? Ken, have we said this? Pat, Heidi, it's not stable necessarily. There's no guarantees. You walk into a place and you get the brochure on your first day in the community, and it says, we're safe. We're safe, we're healthy, we're happy, we're fun, we're orthodox, we're all of these things. And you go, okay, well, that's great. Then I'll be here. And then a year, 2, 5 years later, it mutates into something dangerous. or harmful. And the reverse, although less likely, can also happen. I don't think we've said this. I don't think I've said this in the chapter on creating a safe church environment. But a place can heal, can get a hold of itself, can come to its senses. Maybe that happens too, less frequently. But just to summarize, the chapter that was on my mind, which was a redoing of an article that was in ICSA magazine in 2015, I think, it's 2016, 5, 6, 7 years ago, whatever it was very much my burden professionally to maintain, to create and to maintain a small church community, which was in Massachusetts, where I was, that wasn't going to damage people, it was not going to sort of anesthetize itself, philosophically or intellectually, so that it was just drivel. We didn't want to be that. We wanted to still have our unique definition theologically and missionally and socially in the community, but we didn't want to hurt people. And I was very sensitive to that as the pastor, but our leaders, the rest of our leaders, were careful also. And so I just determined that there are some qualities that a church needs to deliberately, mindfully create within itself to protect its own people. And we shouldn't have to do that, but frankly, we do. We do need to be deliberate and intentional about what we're going to avoid or try to avoid. And remember, we're dealing with people, and people can be sketchy.
Yes.
Even religious people, yes.
That brochure, it wasn't a brochure, it was a very short article that you wrote on becoming a safe haven church, I think. It was just a couple of pages. And it was the biggest hook that once I started attending ICSA, that began to stimulate my imagination that it was worth bringing ICSA into my church leadership as a pastor. So that was a very powerful concept to me. But then also in that brochure, something that spoke very personally to me was, I think you related a group of survivors from an unhealthy, abusive church that migrated into your church.
4 times this happened.
Okay. Okay.
Over 20 years.
Okay.
And not for our recruiting it. They just came to us. And so, I'm not a particularly brilliant person by any means, but somehow or other we had created an island in a part of the country that Michael is very familiar with. Massachusetts is a
New England, yeah.
It's its own country. It's its own country. Anyway, so yeah, that's what it happened 4 times, Ken. To us, without us advertising or seeking it by any means. And I started paying attention after the first time. Yeah.
Neil, one of the quotes that I appreciated so much about that chapter, you said, their urge to flee while they were strangely haunted by their need to be in some kind of fellowship led them randomly, so it seems to us. And we talked earlier in this interview about, the one lost sheep looking for his place to go, and that God in all of his wisdom prepared that place through people for those people to find that safe place of resting that they are so desperately seeking. And I think that's so beautiful in your situation that you were able to create that for so many people who needed exactly what you were willing to provide.
Absolutely.
Well, the demographic of where I was for all those years is 2/3 Roman Catholic. And so it was Roman Catholic, and I'm not critiquing that. It's just a fact. And heavily immigrant Roman Catholic, so very Portuguese. in that area. And so a Protestant church like ours, which was a small, relatively small church, was an oddity. And so the Protestants in the area, the few that there were and are, sort of, hung together and identify with each other. And then, so we were paying attention to each other, which where I'm at now is far less so, because I'm in the Bible Belt in Virginia now. It's very not that way, but we were that way. And, paying attention to the churches the communities that were around. So when trouble would crop up, would explode violently in one or the other, the rest of us felt it. And we learned from it. So I learned from it a great deal. And that's what drove me to write the article at the time. Yeah. And so the book is a wide spectrum of all kinds of wonderful experiences that I hope will be helpful to people.
Absolutely. Yes. And actually one of the other points that I felt like was super helpful, especially for people who have experienced spiritual abuse, was again, Heidi and Pat, your article listing out the seven steps to recovery. In my coaching business, I follow a very similar path where there's 8 steps that you need to go through, because if you miss one of those, that trauma bond likely didn't get broken. And more importantly, you haven't truly found out who you are apart from the abuse that has happened, or the imprint that the abuse has tried to, form you or conform you into. So I wonder if you could just share a little bit about that. And even I'm interested to know how you discovered or developed these 7 steps.
Oh, yeah, over a period of time.
Well,
working with many people.
Yeah,
but
certainly. Yeah, a lot of hunt and peck, and a whole lot of input from a lot of different people. One of the things that Heidi and I have so much appreciated about this work is that we've had the opportunity to rub shoulders with people that know more than we do and know different things than we do. And it really has been a ongoing project for a very long time. The steps that you're referring to actually are, that particular chapter was taken out of a book that I published last year through Whiffenstock. And one of the particular chapters was on the subject of the stages, the 7-stage process of recovery. And those 7 stages, as I say, are covered in detail in my book, Understanding Religious Abuse and Recovery. Discovering essential principles for hope and healing. And those 7 stages, part of the way in which we arrived at that was our own experience, because we had a lot of years in a very unhealthy pseudo-Christian system, which we've come to really identify as a TACO, T-A-C-O, which is an acronym for Totalist Aberrant Christian Organization. Totalist meaning all controlling, an organization that wants to control not only your thinking, your behavior, your emotions, your relationships, your life goals, your educational goals. But there is and I think the majority of the people that we work with come from that kind of background.
Yes,
That was very aberrant. And but these stages, they do float around quite a bit, particularly in the middle stages. The 1st, 2nd, and 7th are ones that are more fixed, and the others, and I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail on that, but we would certainly point you to that particular chapter in Wounded Faith, or to my book on religious abuse and recovery, which unpacks that quite a bit. But to answer your question, just a lot of experience on our part, kind of doing a lot of hunting and pecking.
Yeah, talking with a lot of people,
Talking with a lot of
processing
people, yes.
our own recoveries,
Yes.
and seeing what's really been beneficial and what we've needed.
Yeah.
You know, and so matches what we've seen other people need as well.
Well, and when people understand
Mm.
approximately where they're at and what stage, they
Mhm.
can more accurately determine what's going to be most helpful to me right now.
Yes.
You know, somebody
exactly.
who's recently come out,
Mhm.
generally, we don't recommend that they try to go and pull other people from their old group out. That's just kind of asking to get beat up. And so there's different behaviors, different recovery strategies
Mhm.
that fit with the different stages.
Yeah, and on that note, in somebody's chapter, I forget whose it was now, they said basically the best thing to do is to like let go of control, let go of your expectations, like just forget about that for a second, like chill out. I think actually was the words.
Yeah.
And that is so important. And, again, with my audience who deals with narcissistic abuse recovery, they'll want to try to run the house as they did when they were with the narcissist, as I pick up the children at this time, then I feed them these things, and then I do this stuff with the chores around the house, and the kids do this and this and this. And it's like, hey, your children are going to be okay if you feed them pizza, that's okay. Like you can do that and spend that energy investing in yourself and in your recovery, because in the long run, the children aren't going to remember my mom never fed me pizza. They're going to remember my mom chose to get healthy and chose to get out of a situation where we were being abused. Right. And so it's letting go of the way that life was structured and trying to now relearn a new schedule in addition to new life skills and in addition to all of these other things. I think that is fundamentally important in doing the transition, is understanding, hey, that structure, it's okay if you can have permission, and you should give yourself permission to let go of that structure, that schedule that you were on before.
Oh yeah, that is so spot on, Angel. People coming out of religiously abusive environments, Pat and I have so often seen their need to get off the fast track, start learning how to relax, because often so many groups keep people so busy and so wound up that they don't think about what they even need, let alone what their family needs, and learning how to relax and how to focus on new self-care skills, and all of those things are so important. So that's a great point.
Yeah, how to have fun is something that you don't learn typically in these groups. It doesn't happen.
One of the things that I hear often too is I already did that, where it's like, hey, maybe you go back and, you revisit some of these things. Journaling is a huge thing that I use, a huge tool that I use, and hey, maybe you go back and see actually how far you have come, because a lot of times people will be like, I've already done that, and now I'm not doing any better. I'm not feeling any different. I don't notice any of those effects and that type of thing. And where they're looking to check something off the box as opposed to connect with what actually is needed in this moment, right? Like I did that, like next thing, give me the next thing to do. And it's not about doing, it's about being. That's, what I learned to be, because then once you have learned to be, you will naturally be excellent at whatever it is that you choose to do, because it's coming from a place of love, not for love. Yeah. It's definitely a needed area of research. And again, I'm just so grateful for all of the resources and each of you taking time out of your day to share your expertise and your experiences with my audience. I appreciate that so much. Before we end this interview, is there anything anybody would like to say, any that you didn't get a chance to say, or any kind of parting words for my audience or people who might be watching this, coming to the realization that they were in a spiritually abusive environment or relationship, and what they could do, what first steps or next steps they could take?
I would just simply comment a thing that I don't think I fully appreciated at the beginning of the book process that I've come to learn with us attempting to market the book, or me personally and my limited connections. This requires some courage. To look at your own background and your own experience, or even your own church, your own community, your own set of churches, denomination, whatever, and honestly assess, is there any danger here? That requires some courage. Coming off of that is the thing that I've learned, that this is a hard book to sell. I would have thought this would have had a broad appeal. Everybody would be scrambling to grab a copy of this, and we'd be selling thousands and thousands of copies. Not that that was what was driving the writing of the book, but it has been a hard sell. And I think that's interesting, because if anybody should be interested in creating a safe environment, it ought to be us. Many of our people are just, my life's too complicated, I don't want to look at that. That's the thing that I've learned. So it takes courage, a little bit of courage.
Wow. Yeah. Actually, thank you for sharing that too. I was telling my pastor that about this meeting and about the book and everything. I said, I think you should read it, not because I believe I'm in a spiritually healthy environment, not for that reason, just because it's interesting, the information in it, right? And especially the like I said, the checklist of creating a spiritually healthy environment. I really found that so helpful. And he said, yeah, send it to me. I would love to read it, all of that. But I noticed also throughout the book that you hit the nail on the head really with what makes a narcissist, which is that the foundation is always about pride. And it takes somebody who has a lot of humility to be able to say, like, man, is my environment, is my structure set up to be a spiritually safe and sound location for others? And so that's very interesting about that. And I think it goes more so to speak on a broader sense about repression of truth, right? Which is that if I just don't talk about it, then it's not out there, and then it's not important, and it's not valid, and my agenda or whatever that I'm pushing and I'm bringing forth is more important, and those things kind of fall to the wayside. So absolutely, I think that this is a problem that we see. I think we will see it more and more coming to light in society, just as I see that with narcissism and as a whole. More and more people understanding what narcissism is, more and more people ready to accept that this isn't somebody who's taking a selfie. This is somebody who's very destructive and on purpose damaging other people. So a very interesting point. Thank you for sharing that, Neil. Anybody else want to share parting words, thoughts?
Yeah, I would add to that the book is relevant to healthy churches as well, because people who have been wounded in cultic and abusive environments don't come in with wounded faith on their forehead. They look just like everybody else. You don't know who needs help and who doesn't. And the same would hold for a victim of narcissism, because it's another discussion to talk about the similarities in the two phenomena. But wounded people come into churches all the time, and if there is not some kind of mechanism to deal with them respectfully and patiently, and not immediately try to sell them something, but to use your ARE thing, available and responsive and engaging, but not controlling or domineering or even just overly friendly. There are things that churches could do, and I'm sure wounded people are coming into churches all the time and leaving because they're not getting any help. I mean, our research indicates that.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is such a great point. And I agree, because it's up to the healthy people, in my opinion. It's up to, in any relationship, like the parent knows more, so it's up to the parent to parent the child, right? Not the child to like kind of figure it out. And so the person who knows more has the responsibility of creating an environment where they can share their knowledge. You know, I believe that they have a responsibility to do that in a healthy manner that that helps that person figure out how to take that knowledge and apply it specifically to their life and their situation. So absolutely, I think more education, same in narcissism, from healthy people, not people who are stumbling their way into finding out, oh, this is what a narcissist is because I ended up marrying one, or, you know, getting into business with one, or whatever, is the quickest way to learn about it and the way to prevent it ultimately.
I think I would want to just conclude by speaking to a couple of groups. One is to pastors, my fellow pastors and church leaders. If you are wondering the extent of spiritual abuse that may exist in your membership, or if any spiritual abuse histories are there, you will quickly see that they are there if you simply educate yourself to what it is and then talk about it. You can preach about it, you can pray about it, you can talk about it, but I've never yet spoken with a pastor who said, I don't think we have any in our church. I'm sorry for what happened to you, Ken, but I think we're not there. As soon as that person started talking about the real symptoms and signs of spiritual abuse, his people came out of the woodwork, crying and thanking God that it finally came up in church. And so all you got to do is talk about it, and you will give permission to the victims who are almost doubtlessly in your church to come out and say, yeah, you know, like at an AA meeting, hi, my name's Ken, I'm a church abuse survivor or something. And then secondly, for the survivors of spiritual abuse, if you're helping them, it's just so critical that you really don't lay the plan on them or the requirements and all of that, but that you model to them graciousness. And you model to them how to show themselves graciousness. Because they, you know, abusive churches, they all say the word grace because it's all over the Bible, but it is the theological doctrine that is always perverted or neglected in a spiritually abusive church. It just simply has to be. So the beginnings of self-love and healthy self-view in terms of what God thinks of us has to do with understanding the graciousness that you are worthy of because God felt you were worth saving, if that makes sense.
Yes, so good.
That's really good. Well, you know, I just want to thank you, Angel, for doing this so that, you know, it's a great opportunity for all of us to get that word out and to, you know, create again more awareness for people that, you know, there is recovery from religious abuse, and there are, you know, people working earnestly and care and have heart. And so this was wonderful to be able to share with your audience.
Yeah, I think the one last thing that I would couple with that very specifically is that people that come out of religiously abused backgrounds need 4 foundational experiences. And it's found, I think, in the acronym HEIR, HEIR. They need to experience hope from others. They need to experience encouragement from others, or through books, or through any number of different resources. Support groups are absolutely huge, well-run support groups. We really suggest to people that they look for a good support group if they come from, you know, an abusive background. But hope, encouragement. Third one is insight. You know, it's a new vocabulary, a new world in some respects that people are experiencing when they exit a religiously abusive environment. And then finally, the R, they need to find ways to build resilience to where they can hang with the process of recovery, because it's always a process. So HEIR, recalling that particular acronym and what it relates to, I think could be a start for folks, because we all need those things.
Yeah.
And even those of us that have been out and recovered for a long time still need them.
Yes.
You know, still a process.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You guys, thank you so much again for coming on my channel and sharing your wealth of wisdom again. And the Wounded Faith book, you can actually purchase in the description of this video. It's listed there already. So please go check that out. The ICSA website is also listed there, so you can see their wealth of material and resources. They have conferences and other things that you can get involved in. So please check those out. And just once again, thank you guys so much for joining.
Thank you, Angel.
Thank you
Angel.
again for having us.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure.
Mm.